You all ready to do a bit of an exercise? All right. How many of you like making figures in Excel best? How many of you like making figures in Python best? I think no one would have, maybe a couple of people would have answered that on day one. I'm glad I've brought you around. Figures in Python are much easier. So what we're going to do is actually walk through. I think one of the advantages of Excel is that you can see a little bit better the data you're working with. So we're going to start by doing the work in Excel first, and then we're going to transition into working in our notebook. So you'll see the data sets. We have coffee sales data here. You can click on the source if you're interested there. So I'm going to download this. And so I see it in my downloads folder. And then you can see I have my Econ 0150 1 p.m. class folder. And I'm just going to create, let's see, part 1.4. So I'm going to create the folder here. And then we're just going to drag the coffee sales receipts data set from the downloads folder into this folder, just so we can keep things organized. Okay. Whoops. What's that doing there? Okay, so what we're going to do is just first off open up the data set in Excel. So I just right-click on it, and then I'm going to save it just as we create our figures. It's a good idea to save it as an Excel workbook so we don't lose our place. And you'll see that we've created an XLSX file. So now looking at the data, we see a bunch of things. So we have our rows. We have the transaction ID. So this tells us which transaction is happening, just to keep things organized. This is like the tracker for which transaction has actually happened. We have a staff ID. So if we're thinking about actually like how many people are staffed at each location, you could actually maybe use some of this data to help answer that question, to know like which coffee shop is actually like well staffed or not. And then we have customer ID. So each time the customer goes in, maybe there's like a loyalty program. How many of you shop at Giant Eagle, like a grocery store? Yeah, do you have the loyalty card? Every time you scan that, Giant Eagle knows who you are and knows what you've bought in the past, because you're scanning that, which tells them that it's you specifically. So they can actually track you over many years and know the kinds of things you've bought repeatedly. They give you a little bit of money to compensate you for giving them your information. That's what those loyalty programs are for. It's not to make you, I mean, there's a little bit of like keeping you loyal to Giant Eagle, but it's mostly just so they can collect your data over time. And then they give you money for it. And then with the product ID, so maybe we could think of measuring each one of these products and how long it takes for each one of them to be made. So like a latte takes longer than a drip coffee. And so maybe we would think about putting time on each one of these and counting up the time required for each one, if we're thinking about which coffee shop is being understaffed. We also have quantity here. So this is the number of things that were bought in that transaction. And then the price. And then this hours column tells us what time of the day, which hour of the day was the transaction. And then we have shop. Okay, so the thing we're interested in finding, the visualization we're trying to make is based on the count by category, right? So we want the number of transactions at each coffee shop, but also by hour of the day. So we want some table that tells us each row representing each hour of the day. And then we want a bunch of columns telling us how many transactions happen at each one of those coffee shops in each one of those rows, each one of the hours of the day. Does anyone know how we do this? I mean, there are a couple of ways of doing it. And in Excel, there's a simple way and a harder way. I'm going to show you potentially the simpler way. This one always gives me a little bit of sweat around my fingertips. What we're going to do is select all of the data. So what I just did is I hit Command A to select all of the data. How many of you have heard of a pivot table before? Have you worked with pivot tables? Okay, so we're going to use a pivot table to construct a summary of all of the transactions by coffee shop by hour. The way we do this is we're just going to select all of the data, just like this. On my Mac, I hit Command A, and that selected all of the data set. On Windows, I think it's Control A. Control A, all the Windows people, nice, good. I think on Chrome, it would probably be Control A. Anyone using Chrome? Okay, so it's anyone using Linux? No one, so everyone's on Windows or Mac. That'll keep things simple. I used a Linux computer for almost a decade. Okay, so nice. So we have all of our data selected. Everyone, raise your hand if you've been able to do this. Okay. So all we're going to do is go to Insert. There's this pivot table, which is a way of summarizing larger data sets. So I'm going to click on this. And we've already selected all of the data, so our table range is selected. And then the second option here is where do we want the new pivot table? For simplicity, we're going to put this in a new tab. So in a new worksheet, which is the default. And then I'm going to click OK. And then we get this scary looking picture here. All right, so what are we trying to do here? We want individual rows representing each hour of the day. And then we want separate columns representing each coffee shop. And then in that table, we want the count of the transactions per coffee shop in that hour. So on the side here, you can see the different columns from the data set in the other in the main data table. So what we want in the rows is the hour of the day. So I'm going to take hour and drag this down into rows. And that over here in our pivot table will give us the different rows. So these are all of the different hours where we have a transaction. Raise your hand if you got this. If your hand isn't raised, turn to someone who does have a raised hand and have them bail you out. If someone turns to you to get bailed out, help them. Okay, so and with your helping, feel free to talk as I'm talking. Just because I'm talking, you don't have to be silent. But just keep your volume down so we can all hear each other. Okay, so then the columns, we actually want the shop. So we want to put the shop in the column group, which will give us each one of the coffee shops by column. And when we do that, it gives us each one of these rows along the vertical, and then each one of the columns representing each one of the coffee shops broken out by hour of the day. Raise your hand if you got this. Okay, I'm going to count that as most people. But as always, don't let yourself fall behind. If you're not able to do any of these steps, feel free to reach out to anyone around you. And then the next thing we're going to do, we want something to be counted in the table. And the thing we're going to count is the transaction IDs. So I'm just going to drop the transaction ID in the value. So this is the thing we're going to try to count. And that creates the elements in the table, which looks like this. And you can see this is giving us the sum. So it's counting up how many things happen in each one of these groups. But you could do this with other types of values. So field setting, you could count, or you could do any of the other things. Yeah, sorry. We should go in and count instead of adding. So just right-click on this, go into field settings, and make sure we're counting instead of adding. We're just trying to count up the number of things in the table. Okay, how many of you were able to create a table of counts? How many of you are still stuck? Okay, if you're stuck, reach out to the people around you. Looks like you're already doing that. That's great. Okay, so nice. So we have a summary table. This tells us the number of transactions that are happening at each one of these coffee shops at each one of these hours of the day. So this is nice, but we want a figure, right? Like, summary tables are fine, but it's really difficult to see what's going on. Just glancing at a table is difficult to read, at least for my eyes. So what we want actually is we want a multi-line graph. So what I'm going to do is just select this data. So we have the row, the columns representing each one of the coffee shops, and then the rows representing the hours. And I'm just going to go here, click Insert, and then go up here to Line Graph, and then just click on Line Graph. And that gives us this thing. Okay, any questions here? How many of you were able to create a line graph, multi-line graph? Yeah, good. So you're going to do something very similar to this in your homework. Okay, and then we have the different shops represented with the different colors. We can go to design and add a chart element. I think we should add a title. So let's add a chart title. And we'll say this is transactions by coffee shop. And then we have our different coffee shops. If we wanted to add another chart element, I might add hour of the day on the horizontal axis. This isn't really, it doesn't look like it's labeled as hours. Like if I just see this, I don't know that it's hours. And so I might want to be a little bit clearer. So I'm going to go up to axis titles and then add a primary horizontal title. So this will just add a description underneath the chart. So this is hour. And then if we wanted to, we could add count on the vertical axis. But I think this communicates what's being counted pretty clearly. Okay, any questions here? So this is a pivot table. This is one of the things we can do with pivot tables, is try to summarize what's in a data set. And we've been able to do that we've counted up the number of transactions in each hour, and then we've also broken it out by coffee shop. This is pretty useful. When I ask people in industry what they think you should know, this is one of those things, a pivot table. Okay, so take a look at this. Feel free to get comfortable with it. We're going to do something very similar to this in Excel. It's not called a pivot table in the same way, but it's doing exactly the same thing. Did I say Excel? I meant Python. You've already noticed the typos in the homework. How can there be 2 question 2s? Unclear. So we're just going to go over to exercise 1.4, click on the notebook, as one does in Netflix, and then we're just going to load the imports and the file path. We're going to work with a different data set next, but the first thing we're going to do here is look at shops. So this is just the coffee sales receipts data set. And the first thing we want to do is try to create a summary table. I've included some code in the slides. So this is just loading the data set. Our data set just looks like this. And this is just a really good indication that this is a long format panel data. So you can see shops. So you can see the shop, there's shop A at the top, and then shop B somewhere in the middle, and then shop C at the bottom. And then you can see this is sort of through time, right? We have this time dimension. So very clearly a long format panel data. So what we might want to do, jumping back over to the slides here, we want to just create we could create a bar chart if we want. I think for the sake of time, I'm actually going to skip actually creating these things. It doesn't take that long, so feel free to play around with this. Just copy it over. But this is just a bar chart creating this thing, just a count plot. We can also create the histogram I created in the slides. Just the univariate data, just the number of transactions by hour, not broken out by coffee shop. This is something you've become familiar with, creating histograms. So we're not going to do it in this in the exercise. But this is the code to do it. The multi-histogram is actually a little bit more complicated, but not by much. If we just add hue as our shop, where before we were just counting over the x-axis, if we add hue, this will create separate bins per shop. So let's actually do this. Let's copy this over and put this in a new cell. So I've actually, let's call this sales instead. And then we'll run this. So this is a hist plot. So this is the histogram. We're using the sales data set. We have hours as the x-axis. So we're trying to count up the number of observations in each one of the hours. But then hue, we've talked a little bit about hue, but hue is just the color dimension. So we're separating by another variable. And Seaborne does this very nicely for us. So we've created this bad histogram, the one that no one in this class likes. We have 3 coffee shops and a histogram showing each one. This is the difficult figure to read. So we're going to make this better. But this is kind of the syntax, right? Like we use the data set just like we have in the past. We use the x value just like we have in the past. And then we just want to count up for each one of the coffee shops. And so we can specify that we do that using hue, giving it different colors. And then this is just for bins. How many of you got this? Nice. How many of you like this figure? Correct. So what we're going to do next is make the figure that we like. One way of doing this is by constructing the count table as we've done it before. So this is a lot of code. I'm going to talk you through each one of these parts. The first thing we're going to do is just talk through this part. So I'm going to copy this over. I'm going to tell you what this code is doing. So we're saying for the sales data set, we want to create groups. This is doing the same thing the pivot table was doing. It's creating groups based on the coffee shop in the rows. And then on the vertical axis, it's giving us each one of the hours. Size is just saying, just count the number of things in each one of these groups. When we run this on its own, it gives us exactly that. So for coffee shop A, we have all of the hours that the coffee shop is open. And then we have transactions for each account of the transactions for each one of those hours. And then the same thing for coffee shop B. And then we can see the same thing for coffee shop C at the bottom. So this gives us a nice little table, which essentially is doing the exact same thing as the pivot table in Excel. How many of you like this better? Like better than the pivot table in Excel? I definitely do. I don't like playing around those like drag and drop tools. I just want to write it out. And what we're saying here, we're going to play with grouping much more in part 2. But this is your first picture into grouping operations. We can create subgroups based on our categories. And then we can count the sizes. Unfortunately, this isn't going to work for our visualization. So the last thing here I've given in the code snippet is this reset index. Here we just need to sort of reshape it to make it look a little bit better for Seaborne. So unfortunately, we have to add another thing. This is a little bit opaque. Why are we doing it this way? I'm not really going to get into that here. But if we run this, it gives us a data set that looks more familiar to us. Sort of a long format count. And then the last thing we're going to do is just call this hourly counts. So I'm just going to give it a name. But you don't actually have to do it this way. This is the long way. We want a summary table, which is nice. And then we can create a line plot. And this is the bit of code that you'll use in your homework if you do the visualization at the end using Python. All we want is a line plot. So I'm going to copy this over and put it in like this. So here we're saying we have this hourly counts data set, which is the counts by hour for each one of the coffee shops. Seaborne is just going to take that data set, use hours as the x variable, and then count, that should be count as the y variable, and then shop as the hue. And that'll look like this. So I can't count the questions in homework. I can't properly write code in slides. My jokes don't work. What are we doing here? We're doing economic data analysis. That's what we're doing. Okay, so this is a nice figure. I think this is equally good to the one we created here. In fact, they even use the same colors. That's weird. And this is pretty nice. In Excel, we used, we added a title. So I'm going to add a title here. So this is plt.title, very descriptive. And then let's see, transactions by coffee shop. So that's nice. X label is hours. which is correct, and then Y label is count. So I'm just going to hit tab, and it's going to autocomplete. Isn't that nice? And then run that, which maybe makes things look a little nicer. We don't really need the count on the vertical axis, so maybe I'll get rid of that. You can play around with this as much as you like. You can make your figures look really fancy, which I encourage you to try. But it's really not generally required that they look beautiful. It's just people generally like prettier pictures than less pretty ones. But this is a generally very fine figure. How many of you were able to do this? Raise your hands. And if you weren't, reach out to someone next to you. All right, so this is the longer way to do this. I include this because we do often want to use just line graphs on the summary tables. You'll use this in your homework, potentially. But we can skip the summary table directly and just make a line graph without needing to create the summary table. So I've included this as some code. So instead of using the summary table, we can just have Seaborne behind the scenes actually just create a hist plot. But then instead of plotting each one of the, instead of plotting this bad-looking histogram, we can just fix this using a new argument in the function called element. And what if we set element equal to poly, this is just going to give us a line graph showing the heights. So instead of creating histograms, we're just going to create a line graph with heights. When I run this, it looks like this. This is a little bit better. We haven't needed to create the summary table, which saves us a step. And it looks pretty good. But I want to take it one step further. I actually want to get rid of the shading under the lines and just have the lines themselves. So I'm just going to say fill is equal to false. So we're going to say, let's just get rid of the fill under the lines. And that looks like this. So we have one line, which does the line graph for us. One question I see in a lot of your heads, I can read your minds. That is one of my weird skills, is reading minds. How do we know to set element equal to poly? And the answer is you have to look. There's so many options, you have to look for it. AI makes that very simple. I don't remember how to write these things each time I do it. I keep, I have lots of code on file that I can reference. In your case, you can reference my code. When we write code, most of the times we're copying. I encourage you to get in the habit of copying my code or someone else's code, because it's very difficult to remember each one of the parameters. I think, a lot of times that's what makes Excel seem a little bit simpler, is you can just go and click on things. Here you have to write it from scratch. But once you have it, it's very simple. And it's reproducible. Okay, any questions here? Does that feel like a lot? Middle is good. Means you learned something, but not too much. Not an overwhelming amount. That's good. All right, so we've created a line graph using hist plot, right? Like we're not using line plot like we did here. We used line plot on the count data, but if we want Seaborne to actually count the values without us needing to specify how to do it, we just use hist plot and then use poly for the element. All right. So that's awfully nice. We have this figure if we like this, but I personally like the fill taken out. So we have this one. This is all in long format panel data.